Here we'll begin a discussion about the different kinds of pollinators and the different kinds of flowers they pollinate. Now, when you hear pollinator, you most likely think of a bee. It is the most commonly known pollinator. But the truth is, there are lots of kinds of pollinators, and all these different kinds of pollinators is the reason why there is so much diversity in angiosperms. So many angiosperms are very specialized to attract particular pollinators. And without those pollinators, they would go extinct. What is a pollinator? Well, it's essentially any type of organism that transfers pollen from one flower to another. Now, some pollination happens by way of wind, and in unique cases by water. But most often with angiosperms, it relies on an organism carrying pollen to the flower. The evolution of angiosperms, flowers in general, and all the pollinators is a long history. We say that flowers, or angiosperms in general, and the pollinators they rely on are coevolved because they respond in each other over evolution. As a flower evolves, the pollinator must evolve too to respond to that. Flowers that fail to attract a pollinator or fail to successfully transfer pollen to the pollinator and to another flower essentially get selected against and do not survive. So natural selection is a major part of the pollinator-angiosperm coevolution. Here we'll talk about some specific types of pollinators and the types of flowers they are attracted to. Bees, the most common type of pollinator, are attracted to brightly colored flowers. This is because bees see in UV light. You can see in the image the difference between what a flower might look to us versus what it looks like to a bee. So having bright colors helps the bees see the flowers. Yellow is one of the most common colors for bee-pollinated angiosperms. If you have ever grown roses at home, you may have encountered beetles in your roses. Here in the US, the Japanese beetle is an invasive beetle that often plagues roses. Beetles are interesting because they do not have good visual senses. They rely strictly on smell to find the flowers. Thus, beetles are attracted to strong-smelling flowers like roses, and also flowers that might have a spicy or yeasty odor. Flies, on the other hand, use their sense of smell to find flowers that smell like rotting meat. I know this probably sounds disgusting. Why do they like the smell of rotten meat? The truth is, they don't actually have any reason to visit the flower for the pollination event, but they are attracted by the smell, thinking that the flower is actually meat. Female flies look for rotting meat as a place to lay eggs. When they find meat, they lay their eggs, such that when the eggs hatch, the young maggots have something to feed on as they develop into flies. So, flowers that smell like meat, like this carrion flower pictured here, essentially trick flies into landing on them. While checking the flower out, the fly inadvertently picks up some pollen and has the potential to carry it to another flower. If you ever wanted to plant a butterfly garden, you want to select flowers that are very sweet or very fragrant. Butterflies and moths rely mostly on their sense of smell to find flowers. The moths and butterflies come to the flowers in search of nectar, a sweet reward that the flowers develop to attract pollinators. Often that nectar is found at the base of a flower, which may be long and have a tube shape. It's this reason that moths and butterflies often have very long tongues to extract the nectar. Forcing their face into the flower benefits the flower because it is more likely that the pollen will be attached to the insect before it leaves. Birds are the opposite of moths and butterflies. They don't really have a good sense of smell, so they rely on brightly colors to be attracted to the flowers. Birds will tend to go to the flowers that have the largest nectar rewards. Believe it or not, some plants have flowers that bloom at night. The purpose of this is to attract a different kind of pollinator in the bat. Bats fly around at night and are attracted to the smells, such as this flower on this cactus. They come and extract some of the nectar, and in return, the flower puts pollen on the bat's face before it flies away. Orchids are the most evolved and specialized of the angiosperm flowers. They have multiple petals that have different shapes and sizes in order to do different jobs. Some of the petals act as banners with bright colors to attract. Other petals, like at the base of an orchid, are a little bit different and have evolved to anchor or hold the weight of an insect. Some may be even evolved more than that, in that they resemble another insect, a bee or a wasp. So rather than using colors or fragrances to attract the bee or wasp, they trick the wasp or bee into thinking there's a potential mate waiting for them. They may not release sweet smells, but instead release smells that are pheromone-like to attract potential mates. So a lot of times, orchid pollinators are tricked into coming to the flower. When the pollinator lands and investigates this fake mate, the plant will then place a bag of pollen or a sac of pollen called pollinia, which contains several pollen grains inside, often on the head or legs of the insect. For that one petal to resemble the bee or wasp or whatever it is trying to attract, it must be highly evolved and thus the result of a very selective process to produce a petal that it looks exactly like a potential mate. This concludes some of the basics about pollinators and the types of flowers they are attracted to.